when the woman said, "God gave me one more chance." Steve Harvey's tears came without warning. The microphone in his hand trembled. The studio, filled with hundreds of people just seconds before roaring with laughter, fell into absolute silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Because what they were witnessing wasn't part of the script. This wasn't the Steve Harvey they knew from 1,000 episodes of Family Feud. This was something else entirely. Something raw. Something human. And it all started with a question that seemed ordinary, until it wasn't. But to understand why Steve Harvey broke down on that stage, why a man who has hosted thousands of shows and heard thousands of stories completely lost his composure, we need to go back. Back to the beginning of that day. Back to the moment when a woman named Sarah walked onto that stage carrying a weight no one could see. It was a Tuesday morning taping at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta. The energy was electric, as it always was. 2 families had been selected, both buzzing with excitement, both ready to compete for the grand prize. On one side, the Martinez family, a loud, boisterous group from Texas who had driven 15 hours to be there. On the other side, the Thompson family from Ohio, quieter, more reserved, but equally determined. Sarah Thompson stood at the front of her family line. She was 47 years old, though she looked older. There was something about her eyes, something that spoke of battles fought in silence. She wore a simple floral blouse and jeans, nothing fancy. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail. She smiled, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. The kind that comes from practice, not joy. Steve Harvey walked onto the stage with his signature swagger, arms spread wide, that $1 million smile lighting up the studio. "Let's make some noise!" he shouted, and the audience erupted. This was his element. This was where he thrived. Making people laugh, making people forget their troubles for 30 minutes of game show magic. The game began normally. Typical questions. Typical answers. The Martinez family took an early lead, their energy infectious. Steve did his thing, the quick comebacks, the facial expressions that had become internet memes, the perfectly timed pauses. The audience ate it up. But then something shifted. Steve stopped mid-joke. The entire studio froze. It happened during the 3rd round. Steve had just read a question. "Name something you thank God for every single day." It was meant to be light-hearted. Family, health, coffee, the usual answers. But when Sarah stepped up to the podium, something in her expression changed. She gripped the podium with both hands, knuckles white. Her breathing became visible, shallow. Steve noticed immediately. He had been doing this long enough to read people, to sense when something was off. He leaned in slightly, his comedy mask slipping just a fraction. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Sarah nodded, but her eyes told a different story. She looked at the board, then back at Steve, then down at her hands. The studio audience, sensing something unusual, quieted down. Even the Martinez family, who had been celebrating loudly just moments before, went silent. "Take your time," Steve said, and there was something in his tone that wasn't usually there. Genuine concern. The producers in the control room exchanged glances. This wasn't the pacing they needed. But something stopped them from cutting to commercial. Sarah took a deep breath and pressed the buzzer. "My daughter," she said, her voice cracking on the last word. The answer was on the board. Number 1 answer. The Thompson family erupted in celebration. But Sarah didn't celebrate. She just stood there, gripping that podium, tears starting to stream down her face. Steve Harvey, master of ceremonies, comedian, professional entertainer, did something he had never done in thousands of episodes. He put down his cards. He stepped away from his mark. And he walked directly to Sarah. The cameras kept rolling, but everyone knew this wasn't part of the show anymore. "Talk to me," Steve said quietly, now standing just inches from her. His hand reached out, gently touching her shoulder. "What's going on?" Sarah tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. She shook her head, apologizing with her eyes, trying to compose herself. But Steve didn't rush her. He just stood there, this man who usually filled every second with words, now offering nothing but presence. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Finally, Sarah found her voice. My daughter, she began, her words barely above a whisper but picked up by Steve's microphone. She was diagnosed with leukemia 3 years ago. She was only 12. The studio went deathly quiet. You could hear the hum of the cameras, the distant sound of someone in the audience crying. The doctors gave her 6 months. Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger even as tears continued to fall. They told us to prepare. They told us to say goodbye. And I refused. I refused to accept it. Steve's jaw tightened. His own eyes were beginning to shine with moisture. He nodded slowly, encouraging her to continue. We fought. God, we fought so hard. Every treatment, every experimental drug, every prayer circle, every hope we could find. Sarah's voice was raw now, stripped of all pretense. And 2 years ago, they told us it was working. The cancer was in remission. My baby girl, she got to see her 15th birthday. The audience was openly crying now. Even the Martinez family, these strangers who had come to compete, were wiping their eyes. Steve Harvey's hand never left Sarah's shoulder. Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He turned to his producers, visible in the wings, and made a cutting motion across his throat. Stop the cameras. But they didn't stop. Because they understood that what was happening was more important than any game show format. Where is she now? Steve asked, his voice thick with emotion. Your daughter? Sarah's face broke into a smile, a real one this time, the kind that transforms a person entirely. She's right there, she said, pointing to the audience. The cameras panned, and there, in the third row, was a beautiful teenage girl with a bright purple bandana covering her head, standing up, tears streaming down her face, waving at her mother. The studio exploded. Not with game show excitement, but with something deeper. Relief. Joy. The kind of collective emotion that transcends entertainment. Steve Harvey did something then that no host's manual teaches, that no producer would ever script. He walked off the stage, down the steps, straight into the audience, and he embraced that girl. He held her like she was his own daughter, and he wept. This 6'2" man in a 3-piece suit, known for his comedy, his confidence, his control, completely surrendered to the moment. What's your name, baby? He asked, pulling back to look at her. Emma, she said, smiling through her tears. Emma, Steve repeated, as if committing it to memory. Do you know how brave you are? Do you have any idea? Emma shook her head, laughing and crying at the same time. I just did what I had to do. Steve turned back to Sarah, still on the stage, and extended his hand. Come here, he said. And Sarah walked down, off the stage, breaking every rule of game show television, and joined her daughter and Steve Harvey in the middle of the audience. What happened next, no one who was there will ever forget. Steve Harvey reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his pocket square, that perfectly folded piece of silk that was part of his signature look. He handed it to Emma. You keep this, he said. And every time you look at it, every single time, I want you to remember something. You are a miracle. You hear me? A miracle. Emma nodded, clutching the fabric like it was made of gold. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to Sarah, and his voice, which had been gentle, now carried the weight of everything he'd learned in his 66 years of life. Sarah, he said, when you walked onto that stage today, you came here to play a game. But you gave us something much more valuable. You reminded every single person in this studio, and everyone who will ever watch this, what really matters. Not money. Not prizes. Not fame. But family. But love. But faith. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Sarah looked at Steve, and in a voice that somehow carried to every corner of that silent studio, she said the words that would break him completely. Mr. Harvey, she said. 18 months ago, when Emma was at her worst, when I didn't think I could go on, when I was ready to give up, I was sitting in the hospital at 3 in the morning, and your show came on the television. And you said something? You probably don't even remember it. You said God's delays are not God's denials. And I held on to that. I held on to those words like a lifeline. And here we are. God gave me one more chance. Steve Harvey's face crumpled. The tears he had been holding back, the composure he had been clinging to, it all broke. He covered his face with his hands, his shoulders shaking, and he wept. Not quiet tears. Not dignified tears. But deep, gut-wrenching sobs that came from a place of profound human connection. The entire studio rose to their feet. The Thompson family. The Martinez family. The audience. The crew. Everyone. A standing ovation not for a performance, but for life. For survival. For the reminder that we are all in this together. Steve took several long moments to compose himself. He wiped his face with his hand, laughed at himself through the tears, and looked at Emma and Sarah. You too, he said, his voice hoarse. You two just changed my life. You understand that? I've been doing this job for years, and I thought I'd seen it all. But this, he gestured around the studio. This is why we're here. Not for the laughs. Not for the ratings. For this. For moments of real, genuine, human connection. He pulled out his wallet, extracted a business card, and handed it to Sarah. I want you to call me, he said. I want to know how Emma's doing. I want to stay in touch. Because you're family now. You hear me? Your family. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The game resumed, but it didn't matter who won. The Martinez family, in an act of pure grace, intentionally gave wrong answers to ensure the Thompsons won. When asked about it later, the Martinez family patriarch said simply, "Some things are bigger than winning." The Thompson family won $50,000 that day. But that's not what anyone remembered. What they remembered was Steve Harvey's humanity. His willingness to break protocol, to ignore the producers, to let a moment be what it needed to be. They remembered a man who could have rushed through, who could have stayed in his lane, who instead chose connection over content. In the weeks that followed, the episode aired. It went viral, as these things do. Millions of views. Thousands of comments. People sharing their own stories of survival, of faith, of second chances. Steve Harvey posted about it on his social media, writing, "Sometimes God puts people in your path not because you can help them, but because they can help you remember what's important. Sarah and Emma reminded me. And I'll never forget it." He kept his promise. Steve stayed in touch with the family. When Emma graduated high school 2 years later, there was a video message from Steve Harvey played at the ceremony. When she got accepted to college, he sent a personal letter of congratulation. The pocket square he gave her? Emma framed it, and it hangs in her dorm room today, a reminder that miracles are real. For Steve Harvey, that episode became a turning point. He started using his platform differently. More stories of resilience. More moments of genuine emotion. Less focus on punchlines, more focus on purpose. In interviews, he often referenced that day, calling it the day I remembered why I do what I do. The producers learned something too. Sometimes the best television isn't what you plan. It's what you allow to happen when you get out of the way. That episode, with its tears and broken format and rules ignored, became one of the most watched, most shared episodes in Family Feud history. But beyond the views and the virality, something more profound occurred. In a world that often feels divided, where entertainment is manufactured and emotions are scripted, there was a moment of authentic human connection. A reminder that behind every game show contestant, behind every smiling face, there's a story. There's struggle. There's triumph. There's pain and joy and everything in between. Steve Harvey didn't just host a game show that day. He bore witness. He held space. He allowed himself to be vulnerable, to be moved, to be changed. And in doing so, he gave permission to millions of viewers to do the same. Sarah and Emma's story is a reminder that second chances are real. That faith, whatever form it takes, can carry us through the darkest times. That words matter, even casual ones spoken on a game show at 3 in the morning. That sometimes, the most powerful thing we can do is simply show up, be present, and allow ourselves to be affected by other people's humanity. And that pocket square, that simple piece of silk that Steve Harvey carried in his jacket, became something more than fabric. It became a symbol. A tangible reminder that in our shared moments of vulnerability, when we allow ourselves to truly see each other, we discover what it means to be fully human. The episode ended not with a winner or a prize, but with the truth that the most powerful moments in life happen when we stop performing and start connecting. Steve Harvey understood that. And on that day, he didn't just host a show. He changed lives, including his own.